I would say that I'm not that sophisticated of a business person. I've had some good results, but I'm incredibly unsophisticated and I don't know anything about real estate. Like, I've owned this place now for 90 days. Like, it took a week after we bought it, someone told me that it was run on propane and I didn't know what the word septic meant. With media and internet businesses, that's not necessarily something I could pass on to my family. Like, let's say that Gmail changed something, the hustle would have gone to zero. With real estate, my experience so far has showed me like, maybe I'll lose a percentage, but like, you can always sell. It doesn't have to be that high risk.
Do you remember like where you were when the idea that would eventually become the hustle? Where were you standing? What were you doing? What were the events that led up to that initial light bulb moment?
Well, I was doing a cross-country motorcycle trip. I was listening to the biography of Ted Turner. That's the guy who started CNN, and I was like, well, this guy did it. I could do it. He's Southern. He doesn't know anything about like media, but he kind of got into it. So I decided to do it. And then I went to Panera with my friend Jack Smith, and literally on the back of an envelope, we wrote down like the math. And I was like, oh, I think I can make this work. And so I just started working on it in 2016 out of my kitchen in San Francisco.
And what was the initial idea? A daily business newsletter?
Well,
or what was the initial pitch? Like
the business at first was a conference. It was a conference called HustleCon, and basically I would host it and make like $150,000 or $250,000 and like pocket that and live for 6 months and then do it again. And the way that I made the conference popular was by starting a newsletter. And then I realized content's pretty great, conferences are not that great. And so I decided to create a daily email. And at first I was like, what type of content are we gonna do? And I realized that news was something that people need every single day. And the Skim had launched, Daily Candy had launched, and they had done really well. And so I just decided to use that business model. Frankly, I didn't think it was gonna be as big as it was, because this business, I mean, there was a clear path to 100 million a year in revenue. And we sold early, but a lot of people who I know in that industry now are getting close to that. And I talked to another guy who's the CEO of a $10 billion media company. I told him about the idea, and he's like, you're never gonna make more than $1 million or $2 million a year on this. And when we sold, like, we were doing that like a month. So yeah, a lot of people dismissed it. I kind of also dismissed it, but the math made total sense, where I was like, this is absolutely going to work. When we launched, we got our first 100, I can't remember exactly, 100 to 200,000 users in year one. And that all came from blogging. And the first week that we launched, I had a friend that was making $60,000 a month from selling books on how to like sleep with women. And the way that he was doing it was he would like plagiarize other books and then like get fake reviews and like game the system. And I thought that was like horrible. I did not like it. And so I wrote an article explaining how he did it, and that went viral right away. And then I followed up that article by becoming a quote bestseller and as the author of a romance novel that I just plagiarized, and that was in week 2. And that first month we got like 1 million people to come to the website, and we actually almost got sued. So the book that we plagiarized was owned by one of the largest romance novel publishers, and they like called me and they're like, you know, you screwed up. Like we're gonna make an ordeal out of this. And that got like 1 million views as well in like the first month. And so that's when I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then there was another time that I wrote an article and there was like 10,000 people on the website at one point. And I was like, oh, wow, this is pretty sick. I think this might actually take off. Kind of right out the bat, it got somewhat popular, but that's because I had spent years studying how to write and do content and things like that. I was always into content, but before I started The Hustle, I had another business it was a roommate matching app. In order to get users for that, we made infographics that went really viral. And we got hundreds of thousands, I believe. I don't even remember exactly, but around hundreds of thousands of users from these viral infographics. In order to make those infographics, I just studied, like I read Made to Stick, I read this book called Contagious, and I just like learned how different content goes viral.
And were those like printed infographics?
No, so if you Google like the typical roommates of San Francisco, the typical roommates of LA, Chicago, Boston, and one other place. There were these infographics where we would make fun of each neighborhood in a particular city. So we'd say if you live in the marina in San Francisco, you're like a tech bro who works at and I would name 5 companies. You go to these coffee shops, you do this and you do that. I knew that was gonna go viral because anyone who lived in that neighborhood would think it's silly and funny and they would share it. And then B, I named as many names as possible, all these coffee shops, these companies, and they would share it. And that was a technique to go viral.
Do you remember the moment where either you approached HubSpot, HubSpot approached you, whatever it was? Do you remember the feeling of, oh my gosh, there's an exit, an exit ramp here? Talk to us about the emotion of that feeling.
There was no so what happens once you get to kind of big, you get approached all the time. 99% of them are complete nonsense, and they're just fishing for details so they could steal a little bit of ideas, or they're just gonna do some lowball offer, and they're just bottom feeders looking for anyone who will sell. They emailed me and they said, hey, we want to talk to you about a partnership. Let us know if you want to talk. And I replied back, and the guy who emailed me was corporate dev, which always means they want to buy you. And I replied back with I don't know what partnership means. Just tell me if you want to buy us or not. If yes, maybe we can talk. And he goes, yeah, we want to buy you. I go, great. I don't want to waste your time, and please don't waste mine. Here's a list of all the reasons why you should not buy us. And then here's a list of why we might be an interesting acquisition. If that still interests you, call me. And he called me. I think that there's a lot of people who will say oh, it didn't change much, but it drastically changed my life. It was when I started the company, the whole goal was to buy 30 to sell or do something where I'm financially secure forever. I'd read books about people I admired, and that's what they said they did. And I was like, great, I want to do that. When I achieved that, I'm definitely happier because of it. Running a company when your entire net worth is in it, and let's say we hosted events when the pandemic started, that went to zero. I'm 4 or 5 years into this, and it's if this goes out of business, these 4 or 5 years were kind of pointless and I have nothing. And so knowing that I set out to do, I wrote that goal when I was 20 to sell, knowing that I achieved that, and also that I'm secure and my family is secured, it was the greatest feeling on earth.
You could have put your money in a lot of different places, right? The circles that you run in, your friends, right? You've got people who are all in on crypto. It's a little bit more challenging these days, but you've got other people who immediately took that, started another company, whether it was SaaS, whether it was another content company. What did you do immediately after the acquisition with respect to thinking about what my next move might be? And then walk us through sort of how that ultimately led to thinking about and going into the short-term rental space.
So I made a rule for myself that basically for the first year, I'm not going to purchase anything major. So I put 100% practically of the money into a couple bonds and a Vanguard total index fund. And then I bought a decent car, and I went to Hawaii. I think that's all we did. And then I'd always wanted to do real estate because some books that I'd read, the people who I admire, they just got into real estate, and I thought it was awesome. I also thought that with media and internet businesses, that's not necessarily something I could pass on to my family, because let's say that my kids just don't care about media or they're just not talented. And also media is a little different, but some software companies or some internet companies, you have to ask can this last 50 or 100 years? You constantly have to evolve. With real estate, you do, but not nearly as much. It's not uncommon to own a building that's 50 years old or built 50 years ago. If you hire a management company, it's kind of dummy proof, not entirely, but compared to an internet business. And so I always knew I wanted to get into real estate. And my wife worked at Airbnb, and originally I had a job at Airbnb when I moved out to San Francisco. So I always thought Airbnbs were cool, and I just decided to do it.
You could have just gone in and bought a nice coastal home in California, in San Diego, and rented it out. You could have, picked more of let's just say a stereotypical vacation destination. What was it specifically about this area right outside of Fredericksburg, Texas, that was attractive to you?
A few things. One, I think in order to sustain this business and to get as big as I would like to get, you have to have unique properties. Number two, Central Texas where we are, we're right in between. We're kind of right by Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin. Those are all exploding. So I felt it's kind of a no-brainer to be out here. We're in Fredericksburg, which is like a small but kind of bustling town and a destination for those 3 cities. It's unrestricted land, meaning like I looked into New York because I spent a lot of time there, and the laws are pretty strict. Here, they're not strict. And so that's one of the reasons why I did it out here. But frankly, like I'm looking all over. So like Flagstaff, Arizona. I think Hudson Valley in New York is still kind of interesting. There's a couple places in Pennsylvania that I think are quite interesting. My whole thesis was 2 hours away from a major city.
So over the next, undefined period of time, the hope is that we'll come and like follow your journey, follow your learnings, etc. For people that are like tuning in and watching Sam Parr's journey into short-term rentals and beyond, like what do you hope that they get out of this content?
It's slow. Patience is not something that I have a lot of, and so it's forcing me to be a lot more patient. I think that a lot of people don't do this business even though they say they want to because they're afraid of like taking the leap. I would say that I'm not that sophisticated of a business person. I've had some good results, but I'm incredibly unsophisticated and I don't know anything about real estate. Like I've owned this place now for 90 days. Like it took a week after we bought it, someone told me that it was run on propane and I didn't know what the word septic meant. Like I didn't know anything, but I was confident. I'm like, oh, I can figure this out. And so I think what people hopefully can get is like, if you're pretty smart and you just ask good questions to the right people and you read a little bit, you can kind of figure it out. I think that this is also an interesting game because an internet company, like let's say that Gmail changed something, the hustle would have gone to zero. It would have gone out of business. With real estate, my experience so far has showed me like, often it doesn't seem like it's gonna go to zero. Maybe I'll lose a percentage, but like you can always sell it. You can't always sell a company. And so hopefully people will get out of this that like A, everything takes forever. B, things cost more than you think. And C, you should still do it anyway, even if you don't know what you're doing, because you can kind of figure it out if you are smart, and it doesn't have to be that high risk.